My son moved into my house on a Tuesday in March, and by Wednesday morning, he had already rearranged my kitchen. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was an adjustment period. He and his wife needed time to get settled, and I have the space. After Claire passed 4 years ago, the house felt too big anyway. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard I barely used anymore. My son Owen called me one evening in February and said they were in a tough spot. His wife Renee had just left her job. She said the stress was affecting her health, which I understood, and Owen's income alone wasn't covering their apartment in Portland. They needed a few months to save up, get back on their feet. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. That's who I am, or who I was. I'm 63 years old, retired from 28 years in civil engineering, and I spent most of those years being the person people called when things got hard. Claire used to joke that I was the family emergency fund with legs. She wasn't wrong. When my brother needed a loan to keep his roofing business alive in 2009, I wrote the check. When my younger sister's car died and she couldn't get to work, I bought her a used Honda and told her not to worry about paying me back. That's just how I was raised. You help family. You don't keep score. So when Owen and Renee showed up with a U-Haul and 6 boxes of kitchen gadgets they didn't need, I helped carry everything inside. Renee had strong opinions about where things should go. The coffee maker couldn't be next to the toaster. Something about electrical interference, she said. The spice rack needed to be alphabetized. I laughed the first time. It seemed charming, like she was nesting. By month 3, it didn't seem charming anymore. The agreement had been simple. Owen would cover the utility bills, electricity, gas, internet, and contribute $400 a month toward groceries and household costs. Nothing formal, nothing written down. I know exactly what you're thinking, and you're right. But this was my son. I didn't think I needed a contract with my own son. The first month, he paid. The second month, he said he was a little short and would cover it next month. The third month came and went. I brought it up once, carefully, the way you do when you're trying not to make someone feel bad. And Owen said, "Dad, we're really trying. Renee still hasn't found anything and the job market is brutal right now. Can we just get through this stretch?" I said, "Okay." I made dinner that night, set the table for 3, and didn't mention it again. That was 14 months ago. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't see because I wasn't looking, was that while I was giving them space to get through this stretch, they were making plans. Not plans to move out, different plans entirely. I found out on a Saturday afternoon in January. I'd been out most of the morning, a doctor's appointment, and then a slow drive back with a stop at the hardware store. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize parked at the curb, a white Camry with a magnetic sign on the door, a real estate agency logo. I sat in my car for a moment, thinking maybe they were visiting a neighbor. Then I saw Owen and Renee through the living room window, standing with a woman in a blazer, all 3 of them looking at something on a tablet. I walked in through the front door, which is my front door, and they all looked up. Owen's expression. I don't have a clean word for it. Not guilty exactly. More like the look of someone who just realized they forgot to lock a door they meant to lock. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Didn't hear you come in." "I live here," I said. The woman in the blazer introduced herself, and I shook her hand on autopilot. She started explaining something about pre-approval letters and interest rates, and I stood in my own living room trying to understand what I was hearing. Owen and Renee were buying a house. Not renting. Buying. They had apparently been working with this agent for 6 weeks. They'd already toured 11 properties. They had a pre-approval from a lender for $340,000, and they were looking at a place in Beaverton they were pretty serious about. I excused myself, went to the kitchen, stood at the counter for a long moment looking at the coffee maker that couldn't be next to the toaster. 6 weeks, 11 houses, a pre-approval letter, and not one word to me. Not a mention, not a hint. I waited until the agent left before I said anything. I sat down at the kitchen table, and Owen sat across from me, and Renee stayed standing near the doorway, which told me something about how she felt about this conversation. I asked one question. "Were you planning to tell me?" Owen said. "Of course we were going to tell you, Dad. We just didn't want to get your hopes up in case it didn't work out." I let that sit for a second. My hopes. He was worried about my hopes. I asked where they planned to get the down payment. A house in Beaverton in the current market would need somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 down, depending on the loan type. Owen had been contributing nothing to this household for over a year. Renee hadn't worked in nearly 18 months. I did the math without wanting to. Owen looked at the table and said, "We were hoping you might help with that, as a loan. We'd pay you back once we build some equity." I looked at my son for a long moment. He's 34 years old. He has a college degree. He's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. But somewhere between childhood and that kitchen table, something had shifted in how he understood the relationship between us. Somewhere along the way, my willingness to help had become, in his mind, an obligation, not gratitude, expectation. I thought about Claire. She would have known what to say. She always did. I'm slower with words than she was, more likely to go quiet when I need time to think. So I went quiet. I said, "Let me think about it." And I did think about it. For about 2 weeks, I thought about almost nothing else. I went back through everything. Not to be bitter, genuinely, not to build a case, but to understand. In the 14 months they'd lived with me, I had covered all the utilities. My electric bill had nearly doubled with 2 extra people in the house. I'd been doing the grocery shopping mostly, which had gone from about $250 a month to somewhere close to $500. I paid for a plumber when the upstairs bathroom drain backed up. I'd quietly paid the registration fees when Owen's car came due because he mentioned offhand that money was tight that week. Running the rough numbers, I had covered somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000 in that period, not counting the rent they never paid. And now, they wanted $50,000 more. I kept coming back to one thing Owen had said during that first conversation about moving in. He'd said, "I just need a little time to stabilize, Dad. I'll get us back on track." I had believed him. Not because I was naive, but because he was my son, and I thought I knew him. I also kept coming back to what he'd said at the kitchen table. Not a word of acknowledgement for what I'd already given. No mention of the utilities, or the groceries, or the plumber. No, I know this is a lot to ask after everything you've already done. He'd gone straight to the new ask as if the slate were clean. That's when I understood that the slate would never be clean. Because in his mind, there was no slate. On a Thursday evening, about 2 weeks after the real estate agent's visit, I told Owen I needed to talk to both of them. We sat in the living room, my living room, and I was calm. I want to emphasize that, because I think people expect these conversations to be explosive. This wasn't. I've spent 63 years learning that you can say very hard things without raising your voice. I told them I had thought carefully about the down payment, and I wasn't going to help with it. Owen started to speak and I held up one hand. I told him I had also decided that the current arrangement needed to end. I gave them 60 days, which is more than the 30 days legally required in Oregon, because I wanted to be fair. I told them I thought 60 days was enough time to find an apartment, stabilize their income, and make a plan that didn't depend on me. Renee said, "This is because of the house thing, isn't it?" I said, "It's because of a lot of things." Owen said, "Dad, where is this coming from? We're family." And I said something I had thought about carefully, because I knew it was true, and I wanted to say it right. I said, "Family is exactly why I'm doing this. Because I love you, and I've watched us build something here that isn't good for either of us. You've stopped growing, Owen. You don't have to, as long as I'm here to make it comfortable to stay still. I'm not doing you any favors." He didn't have an answer for that. Renee looked at the floor. Then Owen tried a different angle. He said, "What are we supposed to do about the house? We're already deep into this process. We have a pre-approval. We've been working with an agent for 6 weeks." I said, "I know. I found that out the same day you did. I let the irony of that land. But that's your process, not mine. I hope it works out." He said, "And if it doesn't, what happens when we're 63 and we have nothing because we didn't have anyone to help us get started?" I looked at him steadily. "You're going to be fine. You have 2 working hands and a college education, and you're 34 years old. The answer to your question is that you figure it out. That's what being an adult is." There was a long silence. Then Renee said quietly, "I always thought you liked having us here." I said, "I did. In the beginning. I didn't say more than that." There wasn't more to say. The next 6 weeks were uncomfortable in the way that honest things sometimes are. Owen and I were polite, but careful with each other. Renee became very focused on packing, which I respected. She threw herself into it, and they were organized. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in Gresham, about 20 minutes away, which I thought was reasonable. Owen got a second offer from a consulting firm he'd interviewed with months earlier and had apparently been sitting on. Renee picked up part-time work at a clinic doing administrative billing. I didn't ask questions. I didn't offer opinions. The day they moved out, I helped carry boxes to the truck. Owen and I shook hands at the end of it, and then he pulled me in for a hug that I didn't expect. He didn't say much, just, "Thanks for everything, Dad." I didn't know exactly what he meant by everything. The 14 months of support, or the 60 days notice, or the honesty I'd finally offered him that I probably should have offered sooner. Maybe all of it. I went back inside and the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in over a year. I made coffee. Put the coffee maker back next to the toaster where it had always been, where it made sense, where the outlet was. Sat down at the kitchen table. I thought about the day Owen was born 34 years ago in the winter and how I had driven to the hospital in a snowstorm because Claire went into labor 3 weeks early and I'd run 2 red lights without realizing it. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway of our old house in Salem. I thought about the pride I'd felt when he graduated and the grief we'd gotten through together when his mother died, and how that grief had made me want to protect him from everything, including difficulty, including consequence. I had not done him any favors. But I was doing him one now. My phone buzzed that evening. A text from Owen. Short. "We're all unpacked. Thanks again. I know that wasn't easy." I sat with that for a while. Then I wrote back. "It was the most useful thing I could do. Call me when you're settled." He called on a Sunday, 3 weeks later. We talked for an hour. He told me the apartment was small but fine. He told me Renee was actually enjoying the billing work, that she was good at it. He told me they'd put the house search on hold for a year, saving up, doing it right. He sounded different. Not resentful, not performing, just himself. I don't know how this story ends yet. It's still going, but I know this much. The version of my son I talked to on that Sunday sounded more like the person I raised than the one who stood in my kitchen asking for $50,000 with 14 months of unpaid bills sitting between us. I'm not the villain of this story, but I'm also not sure I was the hero for as long as I thought I was. Being the person everyone calls when things get hard sounds like a virtue. And sometimes it is, but sometimes, and it took me 63 years to learn this, the most loving thing you can do is let someone find out what they're capable of without you standing in the way. I still eat breakfast at the kitchen table every morning. The house is quiet. The coffee maker is next to the toaster. I think Claire would have said I got there eventually. She was always more patient with me than I deserved. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not to rehearse it, not to build a case, just to understand it honestly. And one of the things I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened in that 14 months came out of nowhere. Every step of it grew directly from the step before. I let the first month of unpaid utilities go. So Owen learned that the agreement had no teeth. I let the second month go. So he learned I wouldn't push. By the time a year had passed, the pattern was set. Not because my son is a bad person, but because I had trained him, without meaning to expect accommodation without accountability. That's on me. I own that. There's a version of this story where I tell myself I was just being a loving father, and I was, partly. But I was also avoiding discomfort. Every time I didn't bring up the money, I told myself I was being patient, being understanding, giving him time. What I was actually doing was choosing the easier conversation over the honest one. And that choice, made over and over again for 14 months, cost both of us more than any unpaid bill ever could. What finally broke through wasn't anger. It was clarity. Standing in my own living room watching a real estate agent show my son properties he planned to buy with money he was going to ask me for, money I didn't know he needed until that moment, I understood something I should have understood much sooner. Owen had stopped making hard decisions because I had made it comfortable not to. Renee had stopped looking for work because the pressure to find it had been quietly removed. I had not helped them. I had insulated them. And there was a real difference between those two things. When I finally sat down and told them the arrangement was ending, Owen asked me where it was coming from. I think he genuinely didn't know. That's the part that stays with me. Not the entitlement. Entitlement is just a habit that forms when no one interrupts it. But the genuine confusion. He had lost the ability to see how things looked from the outside because I had never required him to look. Giving people what they need is an act of love, but giving people what they want, indefinitely, without requiring anything in return, that's not love. That's avoidance dressed up as generosity. I spent 63 years thinking they were the same thing. The hardest part of what I did wasn't asking Owen to leave. It was admitting to myself that I had let it go so long, that the most useful thing I could offer my son, the thing he actually needed, was the thing I'd been withholding for over a year, the experience of being responsible for his own life. He called me 3 weeks later and sounded like himself again. Not the version of himself that had been quietly shrinking in the comfort of my house, but the one I remembered raising, grounded, a little tired, figuring things out. That's the only outcome I wanted. It just took me too long to understand that I was the one standing in the way of it.